Yeah, usually I think the live stream does have this. Okay, sorry, we'll go live.
Is your mascot Subway?
The live stream.
Oh my gosh. Wait, I've done that.
Okay, cool.
Ew.
Both your teams have very quality mascots. Well,
This is shunning somebody got the illegal immigrant. Yes.
does your mascot have a name?
Okay, cool. Hopefully we can be heard.
Last year, Cadell was.
Oh yeah, I was the mascot for county last year.
You just nominate one of yourselves.
Hi everyone, the stream has started. Okay, hi everyone, welcome to round 1 of the NZSDC Nationals 2023. I'll invite the adjudicators to intro your name and pronouns.
Kia ora, I'm Amy. I'm chairing the panel this evening. My pronouns are she or her.
Hi, I'm Piper. I'll be one of the panelists. My pronouns are she, her.
G'day, my name's Andre. My preferred pronouns are he or her.
Great, and the motion is, this House believes that political parties should be state-funded instead of receiving private donations. On Affirming, we have Counties Manukau. We welcome you guys to introduce your name and pronouns in speaker order.
I'm Manoia. I am first F, and I also do reply, and my pronouns are she, her.
Sure, my name's Kadal Armstrong. I'm second and my pronouns are he, him.
My name is Jacob Tamanike. What else? I'm he, him, and
Cool, great. And negating, we have Canterbury. We welcome you guys to similarly introduce yourselves in speaker order, name and pronouns.
Hey, I'm Ethan, he, him. I'm going to be first in leaders.
Hi, I'm Angam. I'm second speaker and my preferred pronouns are she and her.
Hi, I'm Luke. I'm third speaker and he, him pronouns.
Great, and just to be clear, if anyone doesn't consent to streaming, we can stop the stream at any point in time. But then without further ado, we welcome up first Affirming to begin the evidence case.
Move the laptop back in front of me so the speakers can use that desk. Is that okay?
Yep.
Thanks. Just give me a word for your paper.
Thank you. In the status quo, we see currently that political parties are currently being given private donations from richer people to manipulate their more so conservative ideologies. Essentially, it's a trade-off of money, for people who have money to people who also have money, to implement laws and lobby the government into actually implementing more conservative ideals at the expense of minorities. So 3 things for you in my speech. Firstly, on setup, on what these private donations look like and what we would assume state funding would look like. Secondly, on why private donations are bad for the people in the country. And thirdly, on why we see that state funding would be more good for the people in the country. Okay, so firstly on setup. So what do we see in the current status quo? Well, we see that a lot of, state funding, we think that state funding would look like how a percentage of tax would go to parties and be distributed evenly between these parties. What do we see these private donations to look like? We see that this looks like lobbying, like richer, bigger people in positions of power, who are more in positions of privilege, companies trying to sway the government to make decisions based on primarily on the thing that benefits them and not things that benefit the actual people. Okay, so firstly on why private donations are bad for the people in the country. Okay, so why are certain political parties more successful than others? Okay, we see this because these political parties, like a lot of the reason why people are in politics in the first place is because of things like nepotism and like privilege, because they tend to have like opportunities to go to university, they tend to have more time on their hands, and they tend to have more money, and therefore they would have like more opportunities to do things, which when they actually get into these political parties, because of this privilege, because they are so wealthy, and because of things like nepotism, we see that they're naturally able to campaign more because of this money. And naturally, like, I want to express that people in political parties who are privileged, they tend to not understand what it's like for actual minority people in like specific countries. And we see that people who actually are giving them these private donations tend to be, as I said in my setup, lobbyers who are like rich people who tend to be more conservative, who want to push down on ideologies that they were growing up into money, things that people that will never understand what it's like to be part of a marginalized group, and they want to push down on like different laws and rules that they want to be implemented just so that it will fit their ideologies, and at the expense of minorities' lives. So, like, why is it true that private donations are bad for people in the country? Well, firstly, it monopolizes candidacy in political parties. So it gives them more money to implement more rules for like these richer people in actual power. And like people in positions of politics already have money. So by rich people giving them money in order to implement rules, like, is inherently very, very harmful. Because the reason why these people tend to lobby richer people is because of things like connections, maybe somebody's family knows somebody else, and things like nepotism and things like that. Okay, and then secondly, they do not look out for marginalized groups because the people who tend to lobby tend to be people who come from a lot of money, who come from like ideologies that will never understand marginalized groups. So when they push down on rules at the expense of actual minorities and like lobby actual privileged people, like these parties, because they inherently come from money, they do not actually understand like the actual expense of these marginalized groups because they did not come from a marginalized group. So when they do not look out, so when they implement these laws that actively harm these marginalized groups, it is extremely bad. And that means that political parties are not looking at out for the best interests of their people due to things like lobbying. And thirdly, there's more power for when you're inherently given more money, you're given more money for advertisement of your party, when you're inherently doing harmful things to minorities because you do not understand them, because you're being lobbied by a bigger, higher force. Yes.
Do you think grassroots movements greatly benefit minorities in particular?
Sorry, could you please restate your POI?
Do you think grassroots movements greatly benefit minorities in particular?
No. Okay, on to my second point. On equalized candidates, on why it would actually inherently like benefit the actual people by giving state funding. So like we said, this lobbying, like, if we prefer a world where we are actually having state funded and the money is actually being evenly distributed, and people are not actually, and the funding is actually given equally, people who do care about marginalized groups do have more of an opportunity and an incentive to actually start campaigning because they have equal amounts of actual capacity to do more good when you're given the same capacity. The reason why this is not seen in the current status quo is because when there is a far large gap in how much money like a more privileged political party is compared to a more marginalized one, like it tends to be the case that actually when it seems pointless to actually like have effective campaigning and reach out to the most people because of that far large amount of money that's actually given towards campaigning and given towards encouraging the public to come see them. And the public actually sees this advertising on our side of the house. They see this advertising because they have equal amounts of money now to actually do the campaigning. And the public sees this, marginalized groups see this, and they actively feel supportive. So why are people in the current status quo actually uninformed on political parties and therefore vote for political parties? Well, generally it's because of a lack of interest and a lack of research. So what changes on our side of the house? Well, when people are now paying their taxes to that go to these political parties and are evenly distributed to political parties, naturally that already sparks interest. Naturally, people are going to want to do research into these political parties because obviously when a portion of your income is sent to these political parties, naturally you want to know where does that go? What are these people like? Are they being given to the right people? So therefore, on our side of the house, there is no longer a lack of a research done because people now inherently care. Proud to affirm.
I thank First Affirmative for that speech. I welcome up First Negating.
Bit of a paper sprawl today. Let's see. Awesome. It was not enough for Side F to simply claim that donations lead to more right-wing candidates without providing any solid mechanisms for why and ignoring the fact that their side shoots new left-wing parties from the fringes in the foot. For this, Negating is already in the lead. What are we going to prove here today? 2 points. One, that by bringing more money into the political system, we get a more diverse range of parties and ideas, as well as better informed citizens and politicians. 2, that by handing the reins of political power to government agencies, certain forms of political manipulation do seep into their system, and this is not something we want to stand for on our side of the house. Before I get into my main substantive, I'd like to do a little bit of rebuttal of the claims that they've made. In the setup of their case, they've mainly focused on equal funding. That being that all parties, regardless of being National, Labour, or New Conservative, real minority parties, they all receive roughly equal funding from this new government body. What this means is that, unlike on our side of the house, the amount of resources these parties have is not proportional to the support that they have in the general population. No, thank you. 3 reasons for why this is bad. 1, it means that right-wing extremist parties like New Conservative, etc., are put on an equal playing field to the majority well-supported parties like, say, National, like, say, Labour, like, say, the Greens, like, say, Te Pāti Māori. These fringe parties are now thrust into the political sphere, and in general, because they have more, stoking up division-type language, they tend to more target, political harm onto minority groups. This means that minorities, the stakeholder that they're trying to help out here in the debate, are, really, really hurt, because what they're doing is shifting political discourse into hurting minorities. Reason number 2 why this is bad is because if you just equally give everyone cash, that's a lot of money wasted from the government. That's a lot of just money going to parties that aren't serious, like the legalized cannabis party or whatever, for example. This is not something we really want to be doing. This is a lot of money wasted, and this confuses the general population because it fills the news media and ads, etc., with so much random advertising for all these different 50 billion different established parties that the people get confused. Political engagement and education goes down. Okay, 3 points I'm going to chat to you about today. Number 1, how their side increases the rate of the most egregious breaches of political financing law. 2, how more money in campaigns improves the quality of our democracies. And 3, why their system entrenches the present political power structures. But first, some setup. What does the world look like on our side of the house? Well, we proposed the following system. 1, all donations to political parties must be publicly listed to all citizens of New Zealand, for them and journalists to then comb over and look over what donations are taking place. This would include name, the amount of money donated, and the reasoning for this, etc. This also means that a government agency would monitor this list for bad behaviour and would be more able to stand out when these kinds of lobbying behaviours occur. This means that the population, when they see suddenly a big donation from Fonterra to National, What that means is that they'll be able to call them out, they'll be able to vote against National when they see this kind of bad behaviour, because the general population doesn't like this kind of money in government. Furthermore, we also see a lot of these donations coming not just from the rich, but from regular citizens of the country. Sure, it might be less money per person, but just because there are so many more like average citizens, this is a really big part of political financing. This allows people to vote with their money. This is really important. Furthermore, right, there are also like rich liberals in existence, like people who are college educated. They tend to be more left-leaning. They tend to care about minority issues because that's just been like the current status of our institutions in university, etc. Which means I don't see this massive like right-wing wave that they're talking about. Okay, point one here today, how they increase corruption, the worst kinds of corruption on their side of the house. Well, companies are motivated by profit, and they want to bend or break the rules whenever they can get away with it if doing so gets them more profit. What this means is that on their side of the house, if companies can get away with it, things like anonymous wedding gifts, chance meetups at golf courses to talk about politics, funding like think tanks that conveniently release polls that only support like one side of the political spectrum, will all kind of start coming out of the woodworks whenever a company thinks that a financial donation in that direction will allow them to get away with it in a second. If a company then wants to donate on our side of the house, what it looks like is pretty tame and innocuous. It's just a donation. If a company or like a rich individual wants to donate on their side of the house, well, since they're already breaking the law, since they're already donating to a political campaign, why not go all the way? Why not go out to like outright bribery, like funding these politicians as individuals instead of groups? This is not something we want to stand for on our side of the house. If they get more bribery, then the process of democracy is like more fundamentally eroded on their side of the house. I'll take your point now.
Why do profit-driven companies who do not also try and sway the government also exist on your side of the house?
They exist on our side of the house, but if they want to sway the government, then they've already got an avenue to do that, which is public, which can be scrutinised by journalists, scrutinised by the public, that can be questioned and looked into. On their side of the house, if they're doing such a thing, then when it's done illegally. This is really, really bad. This brings me on to my second point, how more money into the system improves campaign. And so 2 reasons why. One, because we get more money. Why do we get more money? Well, just because there are more sources of money it can be sourced from. So this is like, there are 4 million people in New Zealand, for an example. If like just a small fraction of that donated, that's a lot of extra money into the political system. We're also talking maybe like richer individuals, etc., who really care about political issues, liberals and conservatives alike. That's more money into the political system. Why is this good? 2 reasons. Number 1, we get better advertising and education for the general population, meaning they are more educated in issues of governance. What does this look like? Well, maybe it looks like the Labour Party, for an example, going and educating people on billboards and setting up a nicer website that's more accessible, that's linked to a bunch of Instagram ads that the general population can click in. They've got a clean, well-explained list of all their policies that is more available to the general population. This means that the general population understands and knows the policies of these governing parties more than they would on their side of the house. More education means more informed decisions. More informed decisions means the big idea of democracy, that people get what they want reflect in government, is better on our side of the house. Number 2 is that these parties as well are going to be more representative of the public, because they can afford things like better information gathering, better understanding of polls and etc., of what the general population cares about, what they're going to be looking into, and what will get them elected, because they want to get elected. What this means is that politicians will be running on platforms that are more indicative and reflective of what the general population cares about. This is something we really, really value, because when we've got a governing, a campaign cycle that is more reflective of the average New Zealander, what that means is that when parties get voted in, policies are more reflective of what the average New Zealander wants. Finally, onto how we increase the diversity of ideas on our side of the house. Note, this is pretty solid rebuttal on most of our points on minorities, because these minority grassroots parties tend to be more reflective of minority groups because they are minority groups in politics themselves. So what does this look like? Well, on us, new non-mainstream parties will start up with grassroots support on our side of the house, and with donations, these parties can then get the ball rolling, start advertising. Their politicians can leave work and don't have to work all the time. They can actually run a campaign. That means that campaigns that usually start on the fringes and express minority groups' opinions can actually start up and get involved in the political system. However, on their side, the agency distributes distributes funding. That means that any campaign that is starting up gets shot in the foot. Why? To start up, you need money. And if the only mechanism legally to get money is by already being started up and having money being distributed to you, you can't really get started up. This means we get less third-party candidates in local elections especially. This is really bad. We really, really want a diverse viewpoints. This is why you should vote on our side. Thank you.
Great, I thank first Negating for that speech. I welcome up second Affirmative.
The first negating speaker got up here and talked a lot about grassroots and how we're shooting these smaller parties in the foot, making a lot of these claims, mischaracterizations of my first speaker's speech, not taking into account a lot of what my first speaker said, actually misconstruing the information my first speaker said and using it and making it look bad when in actuality a lot of what he said was incorrect. Two things in this debate. First a clash on which side benefits parties more, and secondly on the split, which is passing this mission helps stop the monopolization of candidates. Firstly, on the clash, what did we hear from the first negating side? A lot of what they talked about, a lot of their biggest pushes were on how we lose a lot of money on our side of the house, how we actually gain a lot of corruption on our side of the house. A lot of companies, a lot of big donors, companies are gonna start doing start swaying the government via illegal means, bribery, all these types of things. We see this. Few responses to this. Firstly, the way they painted this is as if this doesn't already happen in the status quo. We see a lot of big companies, big donors already not only sway governments via massive donations, but also do these kind of lobbying tactics in the status quo to get more capital in these parties, which see as symmetric, and is actually worse on this side of the house because now they have more avenues to actually try and get capital in these parties to try and get more influence over them via donations. They also talked a lot about how we'll be wasting money on these parties that we'll be wasting money on a lot of parties have
On that point,
that a lot of parties have more candidates inside these and more people to fund a lot more. There's bigger parties, smaller parties that the government will be wasting a lot more money. A few responses to this, we see that when we equalize the distribution of funds to all these parties, what we see in actuality, parties will be doing more productive things with this funding instead of sitting on their hands doing nothing. Like on their side of the house, we see that parties are more incentivized to actually do something with the money they have, because again, this money is limited, and if parties see that this money is limited, obviously they're going to want to put this money to good use, which is helping fund campaigns, policies, improve their public image, which means we get better parties on our side of the house. They can't claim this. Watch from the debate. They also talked a lot about how these donations on this side of the house, these private donations are public and that people can see them. This is clearly not in the spirit of the mission. The mission clearly states it's private donations. How can something be private if the public can view it? This is clearly not in the mission. It's completely not in line with the mission, simply does not stand, which is one of their biggest pushes. They also talked a lot about how there's rich liberals and negated and tried to mitigate how many conservatives there are, a lot of richer conservatives there are in the political space. We see this is wrong. In the status quo already, we see a lot of the big donors are mainly conservative. We see these people as being big CEOs. A lot of private donors already come from big companies, or they come from massive amounts of wealth, which give incentives to parties to make these policies, laws, all these kinds of things that help said donors make more money, all these types of things. types of things. They also talked about how because there's more money on their side of the house, that there'll be more resources for people to look at, which in turn means more education. They did not give us any analysis on how, because there's more resources, people will be more engaged, or people will have more incentive to engage with said resources. They just simply said, oh, well, because there's more money on our side, we will be getting more of this, which means these people will all of a sudden be magically transformed to actually engage with said material, which is completely false. They give no analysis to this. It's washed. We see, because they simply say that it doesn't actually work. On our side of the house, we actually see it's more benefited because we're getting this money from tax. These people will be incentivized, as my first speaker stated, to actually look into a lot of parties. They also, which leads on to a point they made about a lot of negative parties that actually detriment a lot of minority groups. Now will be given a voice. We do agree with this. We say yes, there'll be the odd party that have hateful policies, rules and such. But now, because of the incentive for people to actually go on and look at the policies, the things that these parties stand for, people will now see that, oh, this party is so and so is bad. We won't vote for this party because we don't want them to be relevant anymore. We want to put our money, because again, as it's taxpayers' money. We want to see our money going to parties that we support, which is why these people are more inclined to research on parties that actually do good for them and their communities, because as we see, they see their money having a direct influence on the parties that are actually controlling the country, which is why we win that clash. Onto the split. Before I get into the split, I'll take your point.
Do you think corporations will do whatever they can to get money and influence politicians?
Yes, we see this on the status quo. On their side of the house, it's objectively worse. Because we see these companies are already trying these lobbying tactics, trying to get their influence on these parties. To say it's a very questionable POI to say to us, because we see already in the status quo, corporations are already trying to donate to these companies, which is why donate to these parties, which is why a lot of these bigger parties have a lot of legislations, policies, laws and such that actually help these corporations make more money through laws and registrations, which I'll get into in my split. Which is how passing this mission stops the monopolization of candidates first context. We see in the status quo a lot of the popular candidates / parties are being funded get large amounts of private donations, which help fund their massive campaigns. We see a lot of this from National Labour. We see the bigger parties get majority of these private donations, which is the reason for them having such big campaigning. Which is the reason for them being able to campaign on such massive scales, because they get all this money from these private donors, private donors. We see that because of all this private funding that they receive, they're obviously incentivized to help out said private donors, because obviously these parties want more money to keep coming in so they can keep campaigning and such, which means they make laws and policies that help these said donors, whether they be big corporations, businessmen, CEOs, that help them actually make more money to put in the party. What this looks like is relaxing relaxing laws on the wealthy, tax breaks. A lot of things to do with the tax and how that works. We see a lot of the major parties have quite relaxed policies around tax on the richer part of New Zealand, which is why we see that happening in the status quo, which is why the mute shall stand until further.
Affirmative for that speech, and I welcome up second reading.
AF has come out today and they've contradicted their own material continuously, and they have made this like real misunderstanding in terms of like what the motion actually means. There's 3 things I'm going to do for you in my speech today. First, I'm going to talk about a clash around like what lobbying and like the funding actually looks like. Secondly, the effects on minorities, and then thirdly, I'm just going to be defending our case and extending on our first speaker. Okay, so firstly, I just want to like state before we start that like AF came out and said that like we're not in the spirit of the motion, but just to reiterate, this is in the spirit of the motion because private donations means like from individuals or from private corporations. It's just that it's like it's going to public political parties, so it is in the spirit of the motion. So that their claim doesn't really stand there. So onto the first clash about like lobbying and like how the fundings work. So like F came out and they were like there was like many dangers to lobbying because only the rich parties will get it and stuff like this. A few responses to this. Firstly, like lobbying is still likely to like occur on their side of the house, and like according to the response on the POI, it'll be worse because it'll be actually illegal. So we think that it's like far worse outcomes if they're like still lobbying on their side of the house, which they like agree to, which because it will be illegal and they're just like quite intuitively bad. Secondly, we are likely to get like monitoring on this lobbying so it's not dangerous, because as stated in our model, we will have like the corporations and like the public people would like have to like submit their information and stuff like that, and therefore it would be like monitored and not going to be like largely as harmful as what AF is characterising it to be. Thirdly, like we think it's like kind of like a reach, because if we think like if like the lobbying is like getting like largely like corrupt or something, like the corporation, the individuals wouldn't want to like associate themselves with this. So like why is this? Because that'll give them like bad public image. Like a corporation doesn't want their like image to be like significantly taken down just because they're like funding like a really bad public party. So like if it does become this like corrupt thing that they're claiming, that'll be like directly bad for their image, so they won't want to associate themselves with that. So basically their claim doesn't really stand anymore. They also in here like talked about like in terms of like nepotism and privilege, and like the wealthy people just like give money to the other wealthy people. But we tell you this is like largely untrue, because like a person, like someone doesn't vote for a politician just because their like mother or father is a politician. We think like the nepotism point is largely like unmechanized and also just like untrue. That we also think like if the wealthy people are just getting like wealthy money, we think that's like largely symmetrical on either side, because on our side they can do it by like funds, however on their side they'll still be doing it because those wealthy people were like able to like break the law and like illegally do it as they kind of like agreed to before. Okay. So at the end of this, what we see at the end of this class, what we see is that we actually get like better outcomes in terms of lobbying, because we actually have the safer monitored version, whereas they have a really unsafe version where like people are illegally monitoring, like doing like giving like, even if it's not directly money, like going on trips with them, like suggesting ideas and stuff like that. We think that's like much more harmful, and we get better outcomes for that. Okay, so yeah.
Do we not see that these sorts of trips in that don't already happen on your side of the house as well?
Sorry, could you repeat the first part?
Do we not see that these kinds of trips and things that your team talks about also happens on your side of the house as well?
Yeah, well, it happens on our side of the house, but it's not going to be largely like illegal to do that, because on their side of the house, what they want to do is like they want these private funding to be illegal. Whereas like so what we see is like if this bribery does happen, it's like an illegal act, something that like we cannot stand for, and we think that we have like better outcomes for, because it's literally not illegal anymore. So moving on to the second point of clash on like how this like affects minorities. So what we heard, like a claim we heard from Affirming, was that there's going to be like a political football and like the Conservative are going to be like way ahead. Okay, so we think this is like a few responses to this. We think it's wrong, because it's like likely that like not only one party will be funded. If this is like something, if we make this like go, if this does not stand, then like all parties are likely to be funded, because their supporters would want to support them as they would want them to be like largely equal to the other parties. And we also think that it's like worse on their side, so we flip it, because we actually get like better outcomes for minorities. Why is this? Because like minorities are like disproportionately affected by these funds. So if we get rid of them, we're essentially just like leveraging the Conservative parties even more, something that like both teams have kind of agreed that we don't want. So we think that we actually get better outcomes for the minority parties, which is like one of their biggest points they've made out, and like something that they're like relying their whole case on. Also, what we also heard from them is that like we heard that like they're gonna give like equal funding to everyone. So like why is this bad? Because this means that like everyone, like even like the harmful conservative parties will be getting them. We think this is like, which is like quite inherently bad. This means that they have like more public image. We think that that means that that's like they'll be like way more likely to get support or something. We don't think that's quite good, and we think once again like this tracks down to Liberal parties who like proportionally benefit from the funding, something that we support, because that means that we can get like better grassroots changes, and therefore, which is like quite clearly mixed out at first. And then they just claimed like they get better parties overall because everyone has like equal funding. We think that it's like largely like not necessary, like we don't think that like those small parties need that like big party, like the cannabis like parties shouldn't like need that money to be able to like make them a better party, because we think they're like just like inherently quite bad. We don't really want them to be getting that money and like benefiting that, because we don't think that they're like a party that we should stand for anyway. Then we also heard like a claim that so like we also heard a claim that like they told us that we hadn't really like told them how like this money will be like actually good if they if the Liberal parties do get it. So like just to like walk you through why this would be good, because if they have more money, which like they currently don't have, as we can see, that means they can like do like better changes, and the community leads to positive change. So just to like kind of extend on it, like it's for smaller Liberal parties, it's hard to like come up and like match the larger parties, because in order to establish a large party you need money. Like the way you become a large party is like through funding. So if we don't have that, and like and these like Liberal parties are usually on the fringes, then that means those Liberal parties like won't be able to come up. And what we instead see is like they said the like conservative parties will continue supporting the conservatives. So we'll just have like the conservative parties like having like this like monopoly over the Liberal parties, something that we don't think is that good. Okay, so like at the end of this clash, I think we actually get better outcomes for minorities, because we actually allow them to like have like leverage themselves to be on like an equal playing field, and like to match the larger parties, which is something that they can't really do on their side. And if they do that, we also have like the conservative parties that are like quite bad also doing that. So we think that that's just like levels out and like turns out to be like what the status quo is anyway. So we better get like better outcomes for that. And then so we've taken out like at the end of this, I've like taken out basically the two main points of their like whole case. So we're like way ahead in the debate. But just to like finally do a quick touch on like some of our case. So like we didn't really hear much like mechanisms as to why our case was like flawed. And so I just wanted to like, so as Ethan has already said, I just want to restate a bit more of like the grassroots movement. So again, like new parties, they need money to start up. Like a way a party starts is through donations, and if we don't have this, they can't like start advertising and leave, like they can't just leave the job. So if on their side, like agencies distributes funding and the campaigns to starting and shot in the foot, so like we actually get the grassroots funding, which we think is super important and why we won the debate.
Great, I thank Vicky Negating for that speech. I welcome Mr. Affirming.
Hello, adjudicated and spectators. For today's debate, I'd like to do two things today. I will firstly prove in the first clash our donations valued equally among donors. I'll prove that donations aren't valued equally. For the second point of clash for today's debate, which side positively affects minorities better? But first, I just want to, I'd like to first cover some responses. First, what we've heard from the negating side is that these extremist parties will gain a footing, these conservative parties. But if we take a look at the status quo what is a democracy, is that these parties won't even become parties if they have no people to vote for them. Of course, in this current day and age, in these Western societies, we are in progressive states such as New Zealand. These are very progressive states where we're taught all of these things are bad from a very young age. So the whole argument that yes.
Does the new Conservative Party deserve the same funding as Labour?
Well, that depends on your political viewpoint. Honestly, to make that argument, or does this party deserve over this party? That's an opinion-based argument. Well, going and continuing on to my points of clashes. One of them, which side positively affects minorities better? What we hear from the opposition is that there's already programs in place, these grassroots, sorry for lack of understanding, these grassroots funding for these parties that are generally new. But when are these parties' voices ever heard? When do you see them advertising as much as National, as much as Labour? When do you see these parties getting their viewpoint across? You don't see it, because that is the flaw of this current status quo. The current, with the issue of private funding, what happens is that you see these larger parties fighting it out because they're the most richest, what exactly they want on their side of the nation. Because what happens is these private fundings only target, again, I will say this, will only ever target the biggest parties and will neglect all of these minority groups. And again, I'd like to say this again just to reiterate, bad parties will not gain a footing if they aren't started. Especially, no. And when I say bad parties, we like to say extremist groups, people who believe that these people are superior than that people. These type of people are already taught in progressive states, as I stated again, that they wouldn't even gain a footing in the first place due to the democracy that we have in these countries. Now moving on to our team's strongest point of clash, and probably the most important. Are donations valued equally among donors? What we hear from the opposition is that they try to mitigate the whole rich people will donate to look after rich people by stating that numerous people donate, But they have failed to realize that if you donate more capital, more money, you will gain more influence. It's like it's different when it's one singular person with a motive, or one singular entity with a motive. Then let's say hundreds of different opinions on this, and they could be in the same party still. And on our side of the mission, if we hope for people to donate, this will be free taxes. Taxes will cover this. So then everyone will donate. Everyone will want to have a say on this party, because that is where their money is moving to. So rich people aren't exclusively trying to donate because it is all done through taxes. Second of all is that they try to make the argument that these wealthy people and companies will still have the same incentives and break the law on our side, because businesses, their goal is to make money. That is their goal, to make as much money as possible. But they don't just break the law out of nowhere. What they do, they use loopholes. And what is a loophole? Private funding. One of the biggest loopholes, all these paid gifts, all these, I'm going to go on a trip with you, here's a lot of money. These are the loopholes that these wealthy people and companies gain. And the incentives on their side would be much higher for these companies, because on our side, it is impossible to do private funding. Something I forgot to do in the beginning was just to mention how they stated that private funding will be publicized. I believe in the mission, the words private means to keep to yourself confidential. Private funding. So to say that, to publicize these, to word it in a way, the mission in a way where it would work, and what this house would switch to publicizing private donations rather than switching to state donations. because private donations, again, as my team have been stating, are private. So not only will they will be more incentivized on their side, since their funding is private, these entities, when they do lobbying, they'll be more incentivized on their side, whereas on our side, they wouldn't even have the chance of giving money, because all the money is done through a government system. All the money is done by a group of people, etc. It's all going to be handled fairly, and like these rich people aren't going to send in spies to these government buildings to try and distribute the money differently, or trying to gain more money, or try to gain more influence. See, the fact that private funding doesn't exist on our side takes away the incentives from these people who have the power. And why is this important? This is extremely important, because this not only proves that corruption, lobbying, etc., only increases on their side. It proves that it just doesn't exist on our side, and that is what we are solving when we are making these private donations illegal. And again, they try to push the argument: we have a safer model. No, your model doesn't go against with the spirit of the debate. So absolutely, their case is completely ruined. There's no footing, because the donations are not equal. And that is what I have proved in that point of clash. And also proved that, these bad parties won't exist to give minorities a hard time. Minorities will gain a bigger voice, because they are equally funded, and they are being voted for by the minorities of these people, for the people that are for the cause. So not only do we positively affect minority groups better, but we also prove to you that there is no incentives. There are absolutely no even if there is corruption, not at the level that it is in the status quo, not with these private funding which exists in the status quo, with these people that go on fancy vacations. It doesn't exist. It won't exist, and private and state funding will only improve a society and their people altogether. Thank you.
I think that affirmative for that speech. I welcome up the negating to close the substantive
I think what Side F have proposed today, which is a system where the new Conservative Party, a party that is generally regressive, institutes horrible policies for like minority groups, for like anyone who's different to them, gets the same amount of funding as like actually good parties like Labour or National that institute policies that are supported by the public, is fundamentally wrong, since this leads to worse outcomes to literally everyone in our political system. There's four things that I'm going to chat about today. Firstly, I'm going to clarify what the motion means, since they've taken quite an asinine interpretation of the motion to respond to a lot of our material. Secondly, I'm going to be covering why we still see lobbying on their side and why it's actually much worse. Then I'm going to be covering the effect of minorities, why we see better outcomes for minorities on our side of the house. Then I'm just going to talk about which side gets more political change in general. Now, onto what they say about the motion. They say that you can't have this thing where you publicize the donation amounts because they're private donations. What private means is from private individuals, which is not from the public sector. They can still be published by the government. This was a completely ludicrous way to interpret the motion. That takes a lot of their responses to our model out of the debate. Now onto lobbying. I think we still see lobbying on their side of the house, and I'm going to display why it is far more harmful. Note, this was their main push in terms of harms in the debate. If we remove this, a lot of the harms they've tried to press fall out of the debate. Right, What does actually these donations look like on both sides of the House? Note, they conceded at second to the POI that like these corporations will do anything to get power. This means that we and them both agree that we will likely see people engaging in illegal donations. They conceded this themselves. Okay, what does lobbying look like? I think on our side of the House we see like straightforward donations as it is in the status quo because it is like the legal way to do things. But on their side of the House we will likely see shading dealings, as we've said, right down our line as they conceded at second to that POI. Right, 7 reasons why we see lobbying on their side of the House and why it is worse. Okay. Number 1, I think people still want influence and power and money, and they will like still find the way to get money into the political system. There's still that incentive to like get money in. Secondly, I think we still see avenues for donations to occur. They're just less secretive. What this means now is like someone buying a politician's house off them for a far higher price because that's how they get the donation. It's like a quid pro quo to that politician. That's quite bad. That occurs exclusively on their side of the House since there isn't the legal donation reason. Third reason why we see more donations on their side of the House is politicians see lower funding since all of a sudden like the government's like budget or whatever, which is lower than private donations, and secondly is split evenly. So like a meme party like the internet party gets the same amount of funding like as Labour. All of a sudden these politicians have more incentive to like accept bribes because they have less funding. They're more likely to get they're more likely to take like bribes or donations under the table because they want to actually run at their jobs. Right, 4 reasons now why this is worse on their side of the House. Number 1, they're no longer visible to the public, so like the public is unable to see. They're generally secretive. This leads to like people not being able to analyse like which politicians is getting lots of money, so we're more likely to see like corruption go undiagnosed. Secondly, I think we see more leverage from the corporations on their side of the House, because since regular donations are now illegal, like these politicians can hold these shady dealings over the politicians to get more changes instituted. The corporations have more leverage on their side of the House with these shading dealings. Thirdly, I think we see like this lobbying become exclusive to large corporations. All of a sudden, like individuals like you or I can't donate to these parties since we don't have these back channel avenues to do. Only corporations can now donate. This greatly harms grassroots movements. Fourthly, I think we see less accountability from politicians because like on our side of the House, everyone knows who sponsors you. Like Fonterra donates money to someone and they institute a bunch of like pro dairy industry laws. I think we will see accountability from fellow politicians, from journalists, and from the public as a whole on our side of the House, since everyone sees where their donation comes from. On their side of the House, donations aren't published, there is no accountability, politicians get up to all sorts of shady stuff. Right, what does this mean in terms of debate? I think it means 2 things. Firstly, the main harms their press have tried to remove, since we've explained why at best, like they're symmetric, since we still see lobbying on their side of the House. Secondly, I think at our best here, we've flipped them, since we've shown why there's worse harms to lobbying, and like those 4 reasons I just listed out before you. So here, their main push of harms has fallen. Yes.
Earlier you gave a corruption. What about, would this take into consideration Western countries, which have the least amount of corruptions when you compare to other countries?
Well, I think we see an increase in corruption on your side of the House since we have these shading dealings, as I just explained before, even in Western countries. Now I'm moving on to effect of minorities. This was their main substantive push. I'll take this out as well. Note at the top of this, I think they needed to actually explain right at first why political donations disproportionately benefit anti-minority parties. They failed to do this, so a lot of my responses here being charitable and assuming they actually prove this. What does it actually look like in reality? I think we see like roughly equal donations to both left and right-wing parties. What this looks like is, as Ethan explained at first, like with a growing like university population who are generally more liberal, taking like high-earning jobs, they're more likely to donate to like left-wing parties. Therefore, we don't see the effect. And even like really rich people like Bill Gates or George Soros, they're like notorious Democrat like donators. Just because you're rich doesn't mean you're right-wing. Okay. What were the 2 pushes they made here? The first one they said is that their model allows for more competition to bring in more minority candidates. 2 responses here. Firstly, I think under their model, what we see is regressive parties dragged up all of a sudden. What this looks like is now all of a sudden the new Conservative Party, who doesn't get any funding because everyone hates their policies, all of a sudden getting a lot more funding. What this means is that they can like buy more ads buy more ads and stuff. What this means is like with more ads, they draw more people into the party who wouldn't be exposed to it before because they just give these terrible parties all this funding. Now all of a sudden you get more people buying into these hateful ideologies. Secondly, what we see is we see progressive parties who disproportionately benefit from public funding, like Bernie Sanders, for example, in the USA, who all his funding, when he's like the most donated to politician in like the 2020 election, comes from grassroots individual donors. All of a sudden, he's taken out at the knees, given the same amount of funding as the New Conservative Party. People like Bernie Sanders who want to institute positive policies that disproportionately benefit minorities, which I think both sides agree is a good thing, no longer get funding. Their main pushback to like all this rebuttal we've brought is that like bad parties don't get a footing. That's right on our side of the house, but what happens on their side of the house is they literally give these parties the footing insofar as that as soon as a party registers, no matter how awful their policies are, they get the same amount of funding because of their model. So what we look like here is far worse outcomes for minorities because they're just like giving these policies, giving these like really bad people funding. Right, now on to change. 4 reasons why we generally see more positive change on our side of the house. Firstly, if we look at what they do, they generally limit grassroots movements since like public donations from citizens are no longer valid. This disproportionately affects positive changes for minorities and stuff who I think both sides agree need more help in the current political system. Second reason is we just see like less money in politics altogether since like government funding won't really match up to the private donations. I think we've like set out at first why it's like a generally good thing to like give more money to these parties so we get like better trained politicians and stuff. We got absolutely no response to that. I think that's quite a large benefit in the debate that's still standing. Secondly, I think we see more like informed voters since there's more advertising campaigns. What this looks like is like a website being more available to politicians or something like that so that like the public can better view. So I think at the end of today's debate, one side actually stands for good parties getting money, good parties instituting positive change. The other side stands for like a completely redundant political system where the New Conservative Party all of a sudden gains more voters and can like restrict lots of rights. That's quite a bad thing.
Negating for that speech, as is tradition, I will reverse the speaking order and welcome up and bring reply.
The affirmative side has stood for a bizarre world where the Labour government and the legalised cannabis party somehow receive an equal check from the government in order to fund their campaigns, putting them on an equal, effectively, financial setting and level on a national scale. That unnuanced model is like one of the number one things that is going to put them behind in this debate. Alright, what is the crux of that case? Well, it kind of goes something like this. More right-wing politicians get elected into office because, in general, more donations go to those politicians. Therefore, minorities are hurt because these right-wing politicians generally hurt minorities. Alright, and this kind of all rests on the crux of the assumption that rich people donate right-wing. Throughout this debate, I think we've hit you with actually 5 really strong responses to this, effectively taking this point entirely out of the debate. Number 1, that average citizens still are actually deeply influential in the donation pool. This is because they make up the vast majority of the population, and this means that whatever they generally support gets a lot of money comparable to like just the 1% sending money to like the upper class. We gave the example of Bernie Sanders, who gets like millions and millions of dollars and is the most donated to politician in the States, if I've got that stat right, through like mainly grassroots like movement behind him. What this means is that there are actually major left-wing politicians getting general support from the population who aren't just being like dunked on by rich white-wingers with massive like pools of money. Number 2 is that they've actually given us no real structural explanation of how like rich people necessarily donate right wing. We've actually given you a pretty strong mechanism for why like liberals tend to be like richer because they tend to go to college. College graduates earn like $1 million over their life period. And what this means with like George Soros, with like Bill Gates, is that a lot of these rich people donate left. This means that left-wing politicians also get a lot of money. This is a wash. Number 3, that the publicity of donations under our side of the house through this ledger system we've described provides like accountability, meaning that the worst of these like bribery type things just won't happen. They've tried to like model this out by saying that it's not within the spirit of the motion. I think it's like ridiculously clear to like your average person that it's talking about the layman, like the private sector, not like all donations have to be hidden behind this like veil of ignorance. I think also that's representative and an extension of how these current donation systems work in the status quo. We stand for the status quo here, not this crazy hypothetical. Number 4, as Angam said, is that companies probably won't engage when it's in this public ledger because they'll get backlash for supporting one party over the other. This means they'll lose customers. A lot of companies won't do this. And number 5, when Luke gave the POI about New Conservative, and they just came out and claimed that, well, it's just a matter of political opinion that New Conservative is bad. There's no real reason why this right-wing party is that bad. What that means is that the principal harm that they're trying to demonstrate in this debate, in their opinion, is just like an opinion, just a political opinion. It's not that important, because if they're proving that National gets more donations, and they think New Conservative isn't a problem, they've failed to prove, basically, a harm that they've failed to prove was bad. Okay then, what have we brought you in this debate? Well, number 1, we've told you that by putting parties on this equal financial playing field is really, really bad. One, because there's a ton of right-wing rhetoric. New Conservative, for example, is uniquely going to be incentivized to create demagoguery type, stoking up anti-minority sentiment. This is really bad and hurts the minorities, their principal stakeholder. 2, it's really confusing if everybody legalized cannabis is suddenly putting up as many adverts as Labour. There's such a big overload of information that people won't know who to support. We've told you that it's not proportional to support and that's undemocratic. We want people to have financial means similar to support. We've talked to you about bribes, which is really, really important, because when you if you take if a company wants to influence a politician under our side of the house, that's public and accountable. On their side of the house, it's already illegal, so they might go the extra step and just bribe. And also we talked to you about third parties and better politics through more polling to make sure politicians have better representation of the population. For all these reasons, we've proven a better democracy and they haven't proved any harms, so we should win this debate. Thank you.
Alright, I thank Negating in reply for that speech. I welcome up Affirmative reply to close the debate.
I think at the point where side negating loses is the point where they claim that where they see this debate as a policy debate where we are actually trying to implement the idea of actually state funding, right? This is not what this debate is about. This debate is primarily about how we prefer it over current private funding that we currently see in the status quo. There is absolutely no need for Negating to have a model with this, as we see private donations in the current status quo. This proposal as a way to get around the current problems of the current status quo we see as invalid and not true to the debate. 2 points of clash that I have for you, which are most important in this debate. Firstly, on whether it's a good thing to have parties have their foot in the door in the first place, and secondly, on who actually gets better results for actual minorities. Okay, so firstly, on actual benefits, why is having a lot of different parties foot in the door actually a good thing in the first place? So what do we hear from side negating? We hear that actually it's not a good thing because all of a sudden we're giving really irrelevant parties funding, right? But however, I think the reason why a lot of these parties are considered irrelevant in the status quo is because we don't hear a lot from them, we don't see a lot from them, and therefore when we implement when we prefer when these parties are actually state funded, people are likely to pay more attention to them, they're likely to get more funding for advertisement, and it was never responded to that minority parties do not have a voice because of a lack of funding, because they have never had their foot in the door in the first place, because they were never born into money, they were never born on ideologies that are actually common in the status quo due to things like nepotism, due to things like lobbying. And then there was also another point about how money on their side of the house is a good thing because it buys more resources. However, we clearly and thoroughly explained to you how money, yes, is a good thing because we give more resources. So therefore, when we evenly distribute this money to like these political parties, they're able to get the same amount of resources. They're able to get more like attention from the public, more better research, and inform people from the public. But whilst on their side of the house, they have money that is unevenly distributed because of like the large gap between popularity, wealth, and people and minority groups who are not being heard. Secondly, on like how this, like on who actually gets better like outcomes for minorities. Okay, so what do we hear on our side of the house? We hear that like lobbying is illegal, right? And so therefore, people are gonna lobby more. However, it's never like broken down like why people would lobby in the first place if it was illegal. If things are illegal, you tend to not want to do it in the first place. But then like secondly, on like how conservative parties are given funds, they explain how like sort of people don't like conservative parties and people don't want to vote for them because of their bad policies. Why is this not symmetric on our side of the on our side of the house too? Why, if a conservative party is given advertisement to assert their bad policies and people don't like them, why would people vote for them in the first place? We talked to you about how giving minority parties a foot in the door, giving them a larger say on like minority issues, actively combating them is a far greater benefit that only we are able to attain on our side of the house. On our side of the house, we have better informed people, we have better knowledgeable parties, which we do not get on Neg's side of the house. This is why we have won this debate. Proud to affirm.
Great, I thank everyone for that debate. I invite you guys to cross the floor and shake hands, and we'll end the live stream now.